With that, this meeting is now being recorded, and let's get right into things. Welcome everyone to today's Flux Dev meeting. It is June the 9th, 2021. So I'll be your moderator for today. If we could have someone to sign up as note taker in the meeting notes, that would be awesome. Just some general housekeeping stuff. We abide by the CNCF Code of Conduct, which in short just means be excellent to each other. And with that all along the road, let's get right into the topics. So first we have our weekly check-in with Michael on the image update automation.
Yeah, so I think last week I said, but not everyone was here, I said that I was going to check that there are no issues that are outstanding that are to do specifically with the API, V1 Alpha 2 API, rather than just normal bugs. I'm fairly satisfied that that's the case. And a couple of things have been fixed anyway. So what I'm going to do next is revisit my proposal. So I wrote a proposal for the V1 Beta 1 API for the image stuff a while ago. And I'm going to revisit that and look at any issues that have come up that are about features, make sure that it can accommodate those, i.e. that it's kind of forward compatible. And then I'll, either in that issue or somewhere else, I'll put in a proposal for migrating or graduating to the V1 Beta 1 with a date, as in, probably 2 weeks time from whenever. And then we can socialize that, possibly, that there is a deadline. It'll probably require people to update their manifests again. I can't remember exactly how that stuff works. I think you can do it. If there's no changes, then I think you can do it so that it just bumps the version number. But that might also depend on what was done between V1 Alpha 1 and V1 Alpha 2. So I'll check whether that works or not. Yeah, so I guess the headline is that should be happening pretty soon. And we should be able to bump it to V1 Beta 1, which means that all the APIs are V1 Beta 1, which is good.
Cool beans. Does anyone have any questions for Michael regarding the image update automation?
Yeah, I think we should address the cross namespace reference.
It's forward compatible for that. So there's no need to implement that feature. It can be added and it will be backward compatible because it's just adding a namespace field where, you see what I mean? So it doesn't need to be implemented in the API.
Yeah, it's the namespace field and probably the principal field.
Right, yeah, you mean user or service account?
Yeah, to actually grant cross namespace access, not
just... Yeah, it's another discussion, I guess, but I was hoping to do it without impersonation because I think, one, that's kind of heavyweight, and two, it seems weird to, you see, yeah, you get what I mean.
Yeah, yeah, anyway, if we decide to go with principal as a required field somewhere in the future, then we'll be bumping V1 Beta 2 or something else and tell people about it. I don't think that's a blocker for the beta promotion. I think it's something that needs to be addressed, especially in the proposal of the multi-tenancy. Like we should have a section about image automation and in my mind, the image automation controller is a reconciler, even if it doesn't act on Kubernetes. It acts on sources like Git repos, but it's still reconciling stuff. So in a way, it makes sense to impersonate something. Maybe not a Kubernetes user, maybe a Git user or whatever, but it's still a reconciler in my mind.
I sort of liked the the proposal that works the other way around, where you grant access to a Git repo. But I think that actually fits better with a slightly different API for using Git or sources, where you have the sort of access being one object that you can grant, and then things which are like proxying it and making archives, the actual source bit of it being a different object that would refer back to the access. You see what I mean? Yeah. But that's definitely a V1 beta 2 or something else.
Yeah, we've been discussing having an artifact custom resource that stores the state of what's happened after you pull something from Git, and that could open up new things.
So like the image repository and image policy, or the Helm repository, a bit like somewhere in between there, where there's actually a separation between the just representing the Git repository and following a tag or following a branch, those being separate things.
Yeah, another thing around image automation. So I made a pull request this morning.
Oh yeah, I saw that. Yeah, thanks. May as well break it at roughly the same time.
Yeah, I'm going to paste the link in chat if anyone is interested in. So what we are trying to do this week is upgrading to the latest controller runtime version, which is 0.9. And also upgrade all the other Kubernetes dependencies, like client Go, which comes with breaking changes. So we cannot just upgrade controller runtime without upgrading all the Kubernetes API things, client Go, and so on. And also this links to kstatus and kyaml, because kstatus is now part of the CLI project, and we also depend on that, and so on. So we need to bundle all these upgrades in a minor version of all the controllers, and also Flux will be releasing 0.15. So about the image automation pull request, what we are doing here is basically we are upgrading to a new version of Go YAML, which is the underlying package that KYAML uses, Kubernetes uses, and so on. And we had some long-standing issues with the image automation controller. For example, if you have comments in non-ASCII characters, let's say you write comments in Chinese or whatever, the controller will panic and crash. So it's not even possible to recover. Once it touches any kind of YAML with non-ASCII characters, it will fail. And many other bugs. And all these changes are stuck in customized KYAML because the underlying YAML package has changed the indentation style. So it no longer uses the compact mode for lists. It will it will indent all the lists. Like, for example, the containers array in a deployment, or other things in Helm releases and so on. And I mean, for customize is a big issue. They have thousands of tests. They have to modify all of that. Also, customize has a GA release. They are at 4.0, and they are discussing this change for 5.0, and that could take months from now. So after browsing all the issues in customize, in Go YAML, and so on, after spending a lot of time understanding what's going on, I realized that there is no reason for us to wait and not upgrade to the new YAML package. Why? Because upgrading comes with a lot of bug fixes that are, in a way, poisoning Flux. It's not acceptable to me. Like you have some kind of typo, or if you add a non-ASCII character to your YAMLs, everything will just completely fail. So I think the automation is still in alpha. So I think introducing such a breaking change is not a huge issue. compared to all the other things that it solves. So I've modified our unit tests to match the new Go YAML format. And I've upgraded both KYAML, which comes with many bug fixes, and also the Go YAML package. And this is planned for going into Flux 2.0.15 release that will happen this week, along with all the other things like upgrading the customized controller to customize before, upgrading all the others controller to controller runtime 0.9, and so on. So I'm for moving forward than, pinning packages to old versions. We can still afford that moving forward and keeping up with upstream since we are not GA yet. So yeah, that's my comment.
Yeah, I'm cool with that PR. I think let's just make sure we have a prominent warning about it reformatting things, and maybe even put it in FAQ or known issues or pinned issues somewhere, something like that.
Yeah, we have. So we have a pinned issue around all the customized, all the KYAML bugs that are triggering panics and so on. This pull request will close that issue. I'll create a new issue with the known things that we have right now. I mean, there is no way that the image automation can detect indentation and keep that indentation if it doesn't match is what Go YAML wants. My understanding is that Go YAML follows the Go format thing, where there is only one way in which you can format code, and they are applying the same thing to YAML files. That's not too great because I don't know, Kubernetes users are not accustomed to the Go mindset where there is only one way to format and that's it. But maybe in the future at some point Go YAML will allow or will have some flag, something that automatically detects indentation and tries to keep it. I don't know if it will happen, but yes, I'll create an issue, and I'll also mention in the Flux 2 release announcement about this breaking change. And I think that's what we can do.
Shame, isn't it? Because the promise of doing things via Go YAML was that it was going to preserve everything. It's like preserves everything except for this particular thing.
Yeah.
And chooses the wrong option. Oh well.
Yeah, I mean, there were tremendous improvements in terms of preserving comments in both Go YAML and KYAML, but the indentation stuff is, if you spend time and read through all the comments and all the things in Go YAML and customize, you'll see that somehow it's not technically possible right now in a way that Go YAML is structured. Maybe in Go YAML version 4, we could see something like that, but that's months away.
Okay, I think that's all image automation stuff. Alison, you want to move on to the next thing?
Alison, you are muted.
I know. My computer is like...
You are muted again.
My computer is like literally like having a panic attack right now. Everything's just like stuttering.
Do you want me to take over hosting?
Well, yeah, if you can take over this, I can still listen and hear everyone just fine. Like everything that I click is like 5 seconds behind. Not fun. But I can talk about the next couple items here. Regarding docs updates, I have nothing at the moment. I should have some updates around like, you know, what's happening with that, because I'm still need to get back in on the loop on everything. And the next item is the governance. So a while back, I made a pull request with a contribution letter. I made some changes to that recently. I worked with Scott on developing, just fleshing out the contributor letter a bit more. And we've found kind of a nice way of saying we can invite you to the org, put you as part of like a Flux members role with like the triage permissions attached to it. And so then people like get elevated, you know, permissions that make it easier for them to interact with their pull requests and issues that they may have. So yeah, does anyone have any questions, comments about that or feedback? I've added a link to that into the doc.
Yeah, I was having a look at it, an overdue look at it again, Alison, yesterday. So I think the idea, if I remember, is to kind of add a rung to the ladder so that there's a sort of step between being a user or just, you know, contributing a one-off kind of PR and being a maintainer, right? So there's sort of this halfway commitment of being a member where you are sort of almost like getting an account in the project. Yeah. So I think that's a good idea. It struck me, and I think I get why it is this way. But there is a kind of process where you have to submit an issue, and then there's a bunch of sign-off and so on. Now, we don't have that at present. But we don't have that at present because we don't really have anything in between. You just turned up with a PR or something, an issue, and you are now a maintainer. And you are now a maintainer was basically all the process was on the existing maintainers too. And there wasn't any particular criteria other than the other maintainers were happy. So I kind of had two thoughts. One was, two opposing thoughts. One was, yes, it's good that there is this intervening thing, which is a kind of a lower threshold where you can be an official contributor, and the incentive is then to keep contributing and maybe, you know, more, and aim to either be a maintainer or at least, you know, to be a regular contributor. And then the thought opposing that is, but now we've put something else in their way, which is to kind of fill in the thing and then find two sponsors and then get those sponsors to sign off and so on. I don't really have any conclusions from that. I just wanted to air those thoughts. Is there a way we can kind of make that process simpler?
So
or is it, I mean, it's necessary to have some process there.
Yeah.
To spell out, set an expectation.
I've tried, and with that process, I've just tried to like make it more and more simple. And there is some automation things we can do on our side that makes adding people to an org or a team easier. I need to investigate, in this case, inside our community repo, having a folder that says org, and then having like, you know, a file where these are all, you know, our community members that like, you know, that rung of the ladder, which is like contributor, and then have a GitHub action run off that file to do the inviting people to the org, because that's the other kind of thing that I think is overhead as well, is not only you have to find two people to review it, get that thing like, get this all approved. Now there's even that also add work where, you know, we've got all this admin stuff, which is add to the org, you know, send the invitations and all that. Yeah.
Right, yeah, so there's a bit of clicking every time we add someone. And the other thing I was thinking is that it puts a lot of the onus on the person who wants to be a member. So you've got these kind of two opposing forces. One is we want to make it easy for people to, and kind of have a really low bar for people to just become involved. But then on the other hand, that to be able to become involved, they have to fill in this thing and go looking for all this information, chase down, you know, supply 5 examples of contributions and find 2 sponsors. And
yeah, it's at 5. I've got, so there's like a GitHub. So the idea is that, you know, it'd be like an issue template thing. So they wouldn't have to like copy paste that much. They just have to find the work that they've done, and they just had to talk to some people who reviewed that work. And I think like that's, and from my perspective, I feel that's kind of minimal, and that also kind of ensures on our end that we're not just letting someone in randomly, like, you know, we've had like a maintainer look over and be like, oh, or another, it doesn't even have to be a maintainer in a sense. It could be, once we've established like a larger group of these contributor project members, I forgot the word. Once we have a larger group, it doesn't have to be a maintainer that reviews that, like that, it could be just another member who's seen that work. Like, yeah, I need to just double look over that. Just a second. Yeah, I do see like, you know, the concern of like, you know, we don't want to add too much process and, you know, make it feel very overwhelming to join.
maybe if we said,
yeah.
Just invite reviews, so you don't have to go and talk to people necessarily ahead of time. You can just, if you have interacted with one of the maintainers, then you can just invite them to review your, is it a PR or just an issue? Maybe it's just an issue.
I think the part where like,
mention them.
So a lot of the kind of ideas here, I did copy a few of the ideas from like the way we do things over in Cube. And I think it's kind of a little bit important for people to like reach out and say, hey, I'm going to put you down as a sponsor before like, you know, they submit this full on like request. Because yeah, it might feel a little bit awkward if like, you know, someone's like, oh, you know, you're my sponsor. And you as a maintainer might not feel like that person's ready, or, you know, you wanted to have like a further discussion before like they got like further toes deep in that process.
Right, because you're kind of, you would have to publicly rebuff them. Yeah, no, I was thinking of more, instead of having sponsors, just have approvers, I guess, but so that your objection still applies, maybe. Okay, well, we can always improve on the process if we think of ways to automate it or to kind of make it a little less formidable. I mean, not that it's massively onerous, but yeah, I guess we can see how it goes.
Awesome. Thanks for that feedback.
I'll approve it in the meantime so we can move forward.
Thank you. Any other comments or thoughts from folks on the line? All right, I take the silence as a let's dive into our last item right here on the list, and that is, once my computer stops lagging, it's the multi-tenancy update from Samtachi.
Hey, so it's been implementing the user impersonation in customized controller has been going pretty well. Thanks to Stefan for his reviews. We wanted to sort of bring this to like a discussion on whether we wanted to implement multi-tenancy with kubeconfig in like, user impersonation with kubeconfig in remote clusters. So whether we want the user to exist on the remote cluster and then, you know, impersonate the user on the remote cluster when someone includes a kubeconfig in, you know, the customization tier.
Yeah, the design is slightly in Lee's PR is kind of glosses over that a bit, or almost skips that, because I think it says something like it'll expect a user with the same name to be in the. Does that ring a bell? Is that right? In the remote cluster.
It does say something like that. It says that if no principal, which is what we're calling the user name, is set and there's no service accounts, basically we don't do any impersonation on the remote cluster. But then if it is present, then we do. Stefan is of the opinion that doing token impersonation on remote clusters is a breaking change for users, and we don't want to break how it works for existing users.
Well, it depends. If in the design there's already a breaking change. Sorry,
oh, sorry. Yeah. So it requires now that the service account, if you have a service account name and the kube config in the customization, the service account has to exist on the remote cluster. So, the controller now uses the token of the service account to, do whatever it wants to do. Yeah, that's like the breaking change. And we are trying to do it in such a way that there's like minimal breaking changes so far in the implementation. Basically, we are implementing it behind a flag and trying to do it in such a way that if you don't turn on the flag, most of it works the same way most of the time.
Right. The breaking change I was thinking of was that if and maybe I'm misremembering, but the default, if you just for the local cluster, if you don't give a user principal, is to use the controller's service account. And I think the breaking change was that it would now, instead of using the controller's service account, always impersonate a user in the namespace. So there's already that breaking change. So
no.
No? Okay, that's a shame.
No,
because I think it should do that.
It definitely shouldn't do in V1 beta 1. So what I think we can do is add the principal as an optional field in the current API, and have a flag that enforces user impersonation. Then we can bump the API version and switch off the cluster role binding of customize and helm controllers. So instead of customize and helm controller binding to the cluster admin, they will bind to a role that only allows impersonation, nothing else. So if you don't specify a principal, then it will fail to do anything, right? Because the role binding will not allow controllers to create any object on the cluster. What the role binding allows controllers is to impersonate and then do stuff under that user, right? So
okay, so that differs from the design as in that PR, but it's kind of the same effect, right? Yeah, or a similar effect anyway. Yeah, it'd be nice to have that. It would be nice to have that, the secure version of that be the default, and to switch it off with a flag. I mean, which is kind of a breaking change, but much easier to swallow breaking change. But it's not entirely up to me or anything. So I'm just expressing my preference.
These are two different things, right? One is Flux install and how all these things are being set up. And the other one is the API, right? We can do the API changes in a no-breaking way. This is what Santochi achieved so far. For example, if you specify a service account name and you don't have to specify the principal, what the current code will do is transform the service account into principal, type service account and name. If you specify them both and the flag user impersonation is on, then it will use the principal. instead of the service account name. So they can coexist for, let's say, a couple of releases. And finally, after we ship this optional user impersonation and give people time to migrate, then we can switch the role binding from cluster admin to just impersonation. That's how I see it.
Right. Yeah, I was talking about the design as it was in the design doc, which is slightly different. So it doesn't rely on the controller binding. It relies on you having a default user in the namespace that you always impersonate if not told otherwise. But I mean, it might be a better design to.
I guess
the way you're talking about.
controller still has to impersonate the default user. There's a default user in the namespace that it always impersonates if the flag is turned on, but it still needs the permissions to impersonate the user.
Yeah, you could do both. That's true. Yeah, and you would end up in a very similar place, which is that you can either give a group or the controller service account, depending on the design, cluster admin, or you can not. And that's a way of kind of being trusting everyone or trusting no one. So it's sort of similar outcome. Anyway, sorry, I've taken the discussion far away from what you were actually wanting to talk about, which is how the remote user principle should work.
Yeah, so
my opinion on that is just that it needs thinking through. I think it's glossed over a bit in the design.
So I think it's perfectly fine to use the principle on the target cluster if the user impersonation flag is on, because that doesn't break any kind behavior. There is no principle right now. If you use service account name and kubeconfig, it will just ignore the service account name and use the kubeconfig and relies on the fact that whoever created that kubeconfig created it for a user or another service account that has limited access or total access or whatever. So it's the platform admin creates these kubeconfigs, right? So it can create a kubeconfig for a user or a service account. You don't need impersonation. It's already in there. You use the kubeconfig, right? And yeah, later on when we, let's say, deprecate the service account name, and then it will just require principal, the user or the service account when use principal to always be on that target cluster.
I like it, a design that's the other way around, which is that you always respect the principal as given. So the reason is that it integrates better with cluster API, where you will tend to get, if you're trying to connect, if you're provisioning a cluster with cluster API, then you'll get a kubeconfig with effectively super user permissions. So you may well want to have remote syncs that mention a specific, like use that kubeconfig, but impersonate another thing rather than ignoring. You see what I mean?
So yes, what I said is it will ignore the service account name, which is today in the API. If you specify the principal, it will always use the principal on the remote cluster. Principal will never work with kubeconfig.
Why ignore the service account name? You mean if the principal is supplied, or just if?
So if principal is not supplied, not supplied, and you have supplied a kubeconfig and a service account name, the service account name, it will be ignored. It will not look for the service account name on the remote target. It will just use the kubeconfig. This is how today it works, both for customized controller and helm controller. I'm not for breaking this behavior. I'm for deprecating it when we deprecate the field. Now, if you specify the principal field and the kubeconfig, then we'll be looking for that principal, be it a user or a service account, on the remote cluster. So
okay,
for the new thing, the principal, we always expect them to be there on remote clusters.
And what's the reason to do it differently on remote clusters than locally, right? So that's slightly different, as I understand it, than what would happen on the local cluster, which is that, I can't remember what it was. I just remember that it was different between the, so it doesn't ignore the service account if you give one on the local cluster, does it?
No.
Well,
So
first of all, does that differ, remote versus local?
So today, service accounts name are not used when kubeconfig is specified. We assume that that kubeconfig is created for something.
So, but I'm thinking about what it does if you're not giving a kubeconfig, i.e. you're not doing a remote cluster. How does it deal with service account versus principal? Because I think it should do the same thing.
It does the same thing, yes.
Local
yes,
v remote.
Yes. So for a local cluster, so when you don't specify a kubeconfig, then you are on the remote, on the local cluster, and you use whatever token is mapped by kubelet in your pod, right? And that binds to the service account name of the pod.
Sure,
so,
yeah.
And we use that to either impersonate the service account name that's specified in the Helm release or customization, or we use it to impersonate the principal, now that we have also principal, right?
Yeah.
Now for remote clusters, we'll be doing the same stuff, but only for principal, and let the service account name only work for local clusters, because in the future we'll be completely removing it. So it makes less sense to implement something like deal with both things for remote clusters. Now,
so it will behave differently local versus remotely, because in the local case, it'll use the service account, but in the remote case, it'll ignore it.
Yeah, it uses whatever user that kubeconfig was created for.
And if you wanted to use a different one, then you should use the principal field.
Yes.
Okay, so the last thing I don't quite understand is why it's okay to do that with the remote case, but to basically deprecate the service account name, but it's not okay to do that with the local case.
Because we never use the service account name for remote clusters, so it's not a breaking.
Oh, hasn't it never been there, or you've always ignored it?
Okay, I'll say it again. When you specify a kubeconfig field, the service account name field is ignored.
At present.
At present.
Okay. Yeah, so the answer to my question is it's currently ignored.
Yeah, so we keep this behavior forward until we completely remove service account name. That's it, right? So we don't break anyone's, like if someone has today, by mistake, service account name something and kubeconfig something, it works.
So that's okay. That's not necessarily a mistake. Okay.
Well, it is, because
at present they don't have any choice, right?
Yeah, we've documented that when you specify kubeconfig, the service account name is ignored, right? So they can just leave it there. It doesn't matter. But if they upgrade and we change the behavior, then everything will fail, because for sure that service account name doesn't exist on remote clusters, because it wasn't.
All right, okay, I understand. So basically it's slightly inconsistent now, but it's better to keep the inconsistency than to
until we will
remove that field, break it again. Okay, all right, sorry for dragging that out. I understand now. I don't like the initial inconsistency, but I agree that it's better to keep it than to change it back, and if you're going to get rid of that field anyway. Fair enough. Does that end up giving you more information, Samtachi?
Yeah, so we just only impersonated the principal is set, which makes sense.
And I think you already did that, right? In the customized controller pull request.
Yeah, I just made the change after we had like the small discussion yesterday.
Okay, great. So for the multi-tenancy proof of concept to move forward, we have basically two options. One is to ask people to use only customized controller, or we could also implement in Helm controller and have both as a, I don't know, preview release or whatever. So I think that's what's left on this discussion. Decide if we want to move to redo all this work in Helm controller and release them both, or go with customized controller and that's it. One important aspect here is that Somtochi goes into school till August, so she'll not be around to do that. Someone else has to do it in Helm controller.
Alrighty. So is there anything else we want to discuss today? I guess we've gotten to open floor now.
Yeah, there was, hi, I'm Max, by the way. I talked to Stefan yesterday over Slack, and we at DataIQ are increasingly making use of Flux for our product. And we'd like to contribute more. So I got like official sign off from management that we actually want to contribute to Flux more and be involved more, fixing bugs and stuff. And I wasn't exactly able to find like low-hanging fruits to get started with, to like tell my team, hey, maybe this is a good issue to look at. Stefan thankfully pointed me to one issue, but maybe there's a way to like label good first issues more in the various repos. I saw that there's like one or two and Flux 2 or another repo, I can't remember, but maybe flagging these or labeling these more would help us get more or involved more quickly.
Yep. I personally am not super diligent about tagging good first issues, but I could do a sweep in at least the image automation repos. I think the one you're referring to is one that I tagged yesterday.
Yeah, okay.
There's probably one or two more. But, yeah.
Sounds good. Cool.
Yeah. In general, maybe we could run occasional kind of office hours or workshops or something. This is just off the top of my head, for people who want to contribute more. And actually, you know, be there in person on a Zoom call while someone is trying to figure out stuff to do, and so that there's a sort of synchronous feedback on that. That might be another good thing we can do, especially for people that actually front up and say, rather than just sort of dipping in, that actually front up and say, we want to contribute more. Seems like the least we can do.
Cool.
Yeah, so how give you some background on external contributors. We usually get people that, you know, are using Flux in some way. It doesn't work for them, or it works, but they want to add something new or change some behavior. And that's how they end up contributing something that's, you know, that impacts them directly. In your case, in your company case, totally different. And I think, yeah, we should definitely do a better job at issue triage and trying to, you know, maybe add more other labels, like how how tough it is to implement something or fix some bug. It's hard for me to say that an issue is like good to get started, because most issues are bugs which implies that you quite understand what's going on in a particular controller. But I've seen on other projects things like XL or M or XXL or stuff like that. So it gives you some pointer towards, hey, you'll be spending a lot of time on this issue, even if it feels easy when you read it. So yeah. The bottom line is we definitely need to spend more time on issue triage. And we also have a bunch of issues that are reported on Slack, but never ended up in GitHub. And, in a way, that's a shame, and we should scan more. And even if that particular person that reported an issue on Slack they don't want to create it again on GitHub, someone that sees it should actually create that issue, just copy pasting it or something.
I'd be happy to help there, of course.
Yeah,
you know what? Oh, sorry, go ahead. One thing that is a way of contributing that is super valuable and doesn't need you to understand all the internals and kind of model and everything from day one is finding bugs that haven't been kind of verified or reproduced, and just trying to go on the description that was given and trying to get a good test case together. So there's a couple of bugs in the image automation stuff recently that were a bit like that. In fact, there's one I'm still chasing down. And that is really, really helpful, and also usually doesn't need a giant amount of knowledge of the internals. But again, it's something that they're not necessarily easy to identify just on the surface. So possibly we could have a tag for that sort of bug where it's going to be, it's not trivial to reproduce and might need a bit of backwards and forwards. And that can always lead into actually fixing the bug as well, which is, once you figure out what's going wrong, it might actually be something simple.
Yeah, and of course, documentation. I mean, if something is very hard to get started, like let's say, Max, you observe that it's quite hard to create a patch on some controller. Usually it means we didn't explain how the controller works good enough. So someone that has knowledge of Kubernetes, has knowledge of Go, if that particular person is not able to go in there and figure out where it should at least write the code or write a test or something like that, then it's a documentation issue. And we definitely have lots of documentation issues. We lack documentation around contributing. We have a little bit of documentation on how we can run each controller locally, but that's about it. And it's definitely not enough. Go, Kindan.
I was wondering if it would be helpful to add a meeting or repurpose one of the meetings each month for an event like a bug scrub, like SIG CLI hosts, where we just go through bug queues and someone with the triage role is present, and we can start assigning them to people as they come for volunteer.
Yeah, I'm all for that.
My only concern is like if we do like a specific point in time where it's like you gotta turn up at this point in time to be able to raise your hand kind of thing. People might not be able to access that. It might not be accessible to some contributors. So just making sure like this bug scrub thing is we do like leave some things unassigned and left over for people who might not be able to attend these meetings. And yeah, I'm not sure if I misunderstood something along those lines.
I understood it like this meeting will first and foremost be about triage and decide, hey, is this issue doable for someone that's not into Flux source code for months or not? Label them properly, and then if if someone on that meeting says, hey, I want to do that, then we can also assign an issue to it, but shouldn't be like, this is the only way where you can be assigned to issues. Of course, if you reply to an issue, hey, I want to take this on, someone from the team will assign it to you. That's guaranteed in 24 hours. So what I feel we are missing is this trudge part where we properly label things.
Maybe that's a good time for a word of praise, because I think I created 2 PRs on a project, yeah, and both got merged like immediately, which is great. So time to merge is really, really short.
Yes, if it's not like a huge change that usually if you don't change the behavior, if you add optional things or if you fix a bug in a way that doesn't break other things, it will be merged like really fast. But with things like multi-tenancy, if you look at the proposal and all the implementations and so on, it took us months. But that's a huge topic. Like we don't want to merge that in 10 seconds and then realize, oh, we have all these CVs on our head because we merged it.
Cool, thanks.
So we had about 5 minutes left. So if we give everyone 5 minutes of their day back, or do we have a couple of things we can fit into this meeting?
I am catching up on notes, in meeting notes.
Awesome.
That's what I'll be doing for 5 minutes.
Sounds good. Well, yeah. I guess we can wrap things up here for now and catch you next week. Get the late version of this meeting. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming along. Catch you later.
Thank you.
Cool.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Alison. Thanks, everyone.
See ya.